Hey everyone, welcome to another deep dive. We've got a really fascinating one for you today.
Yeah, this one should be interesting.
So we're going to be jumping into a time machine going back to 1997.
Back when the internet was
Well, the early days.
the Wild West.
Exactly. And we're looking at a book called The Sovereign Individual.
Written by James Dale Davidson and William Rees-Mogg.
And one of our listeners actually sent this in a while ago.
Yeah, they sent us some excerpts.
And it's really fascinating looking at what they predicted back then about how technology was going to shape our future.
Yeah, especially because they wrote this before the internet was
Mainstream.
most people didn't even use the
And the
internet.
dial-up modems, folks.
Exactly. So it's really remarkable how they were already thinking about these things.
And one of the things that really jumped out was this idea that we're moving into a fourth stage of human society.
Yeah, the fourth stage.
Okay, so fourth stage, that's a pretty big claim.
It is a big claim. They actually compare it to the agricultural revolution,
Oh, wow.
which, if you think about it, was a total game changer.
Yeah, I mean, it completely transformed
Everything, yeah.
how humans lived and interacted. And
We went from, small nomadic hunter-gatherer groups to these settled agricultural societies. And that shift changed social structures, power dynamics, how we thought about land ownership.
so they're saying that the information age is like that.
Exactly. They're saying it's just as big of a transformation.
Wow.
And a key part of this transformation is what they call the rise of the sovereign individual.
Okay, so what does that even mean? Sovereign individual?
So imagine a world where, nationality becomes less important than your skills, your knowledge, your ability to navigate this digital landscape.
So it's more about what you can do than where you're from.
Exactly.
It's almost like going back to the Middle Ages a little bit,
That's a really interesting parallel.
where, it was more about guilds and patronage networks than fixed borders.
Right. And they see this future where individuals have more autonomy. They can operate outside the traditional constraints of nation states.
So nation states become less important.
They start to lose their monopoly on power.
Okay, hold on. So are they saying nation states could, disappear?
Not necessarily disappear, but their role changes significantly.
Okay.
They face increasing competition from new forms of sovereignty.
Like what?
Well, it could be individuals. It could be online communities, corporations who are wielding a lot of influence in the digital realm.
So it's like a more fragmented kind of power structure.
Exactly.
That raises a lot of questions, though.
It does.
What happens to things like laws, national defense, if everyone's kind of off doing their own thing?
Right. What about citizenship and loyalty in a world without borders?
Do we end up in a system where it's every person for themselves?
It's a real possibility. And they actually explore these questions in the book, especially when it comes to things like warfare.
Warfare. Okay, so how does warfare fit into this whole sovereign individual idea?
Well, they argue that traditional military power becomes less decisive
Okay.
as information warfare rises.
So it's not about tanks and troops anymore.
Not as much. It's more about who controls the flow of information.
Hackers and digital mercenaries?
Exactly. They could hold as much power as armies disrupting infrastructure economies with just,
The click of a button.
exactly.
Wow.
And to explain this, they introduced this concept called megapolitics.
Megapolitics?
Megapolitics.
Okay.
So the idea is that technology shapes the logic of violence,
Okay.
and that then determines what kind of political systems can survive.
Okay, break that down for me because I'm getting a little lost in the mega part.
Okay, so think about it this way. The invention of gunpowder
Okay.
changed warfare dramatically, right?
Yes, it did.
You could suddenly project power over larger areas, so you needed these centralized structures like nation states.
Right, to manage these armies and resources.
Exactly, and they're arguing that the internet is having a similar effect, but in the opposite direction.
So instead of centralizing power, the internet is decentralizing it.
Right.
Okay.
And they say that this could lead to a shift away from mass democracy,
Towards.
smaller, more efficient forms of governance.
Okay.
They even suggest the possibility of anarchy in some areas.
Anarchy as in no government at all.
Yeah, that's one of their more radical predictions.
It's a pretty radical idea.
It is. They argue that technology could allow individuals to manage their own affairs
Okay.
and create new forms of direct democracy that are more responsive to their needs.
So, what does that look like?
Well, think about online platforms where people could vote directly on issues that affect them,
Okay.
rather than relying on elected representatives.
That's pretty different from how we do things now.
It's almost like going back to the ancient Greek model of direct democracy, but with this digital twist.
Right, with a digital twist.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got these nation states. maybe declining individuals with more power. What happens to things like taxes?
Right, so they get into this idea of the economics of protection,
Okay.
and that they argue that individuals will be able to shop for the best protection services,
Okay.
whether it's security, legal representation, dispute resolution.
So it's like we shop for insurance today.
Exactly.
Okay.
And they say that this will drive down the cost of government and force this radical restructuring of how we think about taxation.
So instead of paying taxes to a single government, you'd be paying for specific services from different providers.
Right.
Wow.
Imagine you could choose the providers that offer you the best value for your money.
So it's like a free market for government services. In a way, yes.
Okay, so we've got weakening nation states, individuals with more power. This totally different way of paying for services. It sounds like a pretty different world from what we live in now.
It is. It's a really big shift. And they argue that this is going to have profound implications for everything from the future of work to the very values that we hold dear. Well, we've only just scratched the surface here. There's
Yeah.
so much more to unpack in the sovereign individual.
Absolutely. We've got a lot more to talk about,
So we're going to take a quick break
and we'll be right back.
to dive even deeper into their predictions about the future of money
Yeah, and technology.
and even human nature. So stay with us. Welcome back to our deep dive into the sovereign individual. Last time we were talking about some pretty radical shifts in power, weakening nation states, individuals having more autonomy.
Right, and we kind of left off on this question of taxes. Like, what happens in this world where traditional government structures start to break down?
Yeah, do taxes just disappear?
Well, not necessarily, but it gets really interesting.
Okay, tell me more.
So they talk about this concept of cyber cash.
Cyber cash. Okay, so are we talking Bitcoin here?
Not exactly. They were writing this in 1997. Remember? So Bitcoin wasn't even a thing.
Pre-Bitcoin.
Exactly. But the ideas are really similar.
Okay.
They basically predicted that digital forms of money would emerge
Okay.
and challenge the power of nation states to control currencies.
So like a decentralized currency?
Yeah, something that's not tied to any one government.
Interesting. And they thought this would have a big impact on taxes.
Oh, yeah. They predicted that as more economic activity shifted online and individuals had more control over their finances, traditional forms of taxation would be really hard to enforce.
I can see that it's like the ultimate tax haven. Your money just exists in this digital realm.
Right, and they thought this would lead to a world where individuals could easily move their assets and income to low-tax jurisdictions.
So governments would have to compete.
Exactly. They'd have to offer more favorable tax policies to attract citizens and businesses.
That's a pretty big shift from how things work now.
It is. It's almost like a free market for governance.
Right. So it's not just about avoiding taxes. It's about having more choice.
Exactly. More control over your own financial destiny.
And that kind of ties back to this whole idea of the sovereign individual, right?
It does. As people gain more financial freedom and mobility, they become less reliant on the nation state for things like protection and social services.
So it's almost like the traditional social contract breaks down.
In a way, yeah.
Okay, so what does that mean for society as a whole?
Well, they argue that this shift could lead to a more individualistic and self-reliant society where people take more responsibility for their own well-being.
Okay, but some people might hear that and think, oh, that sounds like chaos, a return to the law of the jungle.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a concern. But they also argue that history is full of examples where decentralization and fragmentation have actually led to innovation and progress.
Okay, so like what? Give me an example.
Well, they talk about the fall of the Roman Empire and the rise of feudalism. It was a chaotic time, for sure, but it also led to new institutions, new ways of life.
So sometimes you need a little bit of creative destruction.
Exactly. And they believe that the information age could be a similar period of transition and transformation.
So the old order is breaking down, but what replaces it is still up in the air.
Right. It's like we're standing on the edge of a new frontier.
And we don't know what's on the other side.
Exactly. And to understand how this new world might take shape, they delve into some fascinating ideas about human nature.
Okay, human nature. This should be good.
So they draw on this concept called epigenesis from evolutionary biology.
Epigenesis. Okay, I'm not familiar with that.
It basically means how our genes are expressed based on environmental factors.
Okay.
So their argument is that our deep-seated instincts, things like our tendency to favor in-groups and be wary of outsiders, could be manipulated.
By who?
By those in power. As the nation-state weakens, they might use these instincts to stoke fear and resentment.
Towards who?
Towards the sovereign individuals, towards those who embrace global citizenship and reject traditional forms of authority.
So it's like a backlash against this new way of thinking.
Exactly.
Wow, so this sovereign individual future, it's not all sunshine and roses.
Not necessarily. There are definitely
Okay.
potential downsides, challenges to consider.
Like, what else besides this potential backlash?
Well, they also talk about the potential rise of criminal organizations as the power of the nation state weakens.
So these groups could step into the void.
Exactly, offering protection, other services in exchange for loyalty or payment.
Okay, so there's a lot to be concerned about, but are there any positive possibilities in this future?
Oh, absolutely. They argue that the information age also creates new opportunities for individuals to connect and collaborate with each other.
So even as nation states decline, we'll still have these strong networks.
Exactly. They believe that new forms of community will emerge, transcending geographical boundaries, connecting people based on shared interests and values.
So it's not about withdrawing from society and becoming a lone wolf.
No, it's about finding your tribe within this evolving landscape.
I like that.
And they also emphasize the importance of becoming an active participant in shaping this future rather than just being a passive bystander.
So engage in critical thinking, question assumptions.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to challenge the status quo, connect with others, share your ideas, work together to create the world you want to see.
It's a powerful message. It's like they're saying the future is not something that happens to us, it's something we create.
Exactly. And I think that's a really important takeaway from the sovereign individual.
Definitely a lot to think about.
It is a lot to unpack.
And I think we've given our listeners plenty to chew on.
Yeah, I hope so.
So let's shift gears a bit and talk about some practical takeaways.
Yeah, let's bring it down to earth a bit.
What can people actually do to prepare for this future of technological disruption and shifting power dynamics that Davidson and Rees-Mogg are describing?
Right, because it's all well and good to talk about these big ideas, but what are the actionable steps?
Exactly. So what do they suggest? Welcome back to the show. So we've spent the last two segments really digging into these big ideas from the sovereign individual, this whole concept of declining nation states, individuals having more power and autonomy.
Yeah, totally different way of thinking about money and governance.
Right. And I think we've given our listeners a lot to ponder.
Definitely some food for thought.
But let's shift gears a bit now and talk about some practical takeaways.
Yeah, let's get down to brass tacks.
What can people actually do to prepare for this future? This future that Davidson and Rees-Mogg are describing, this future of technological disruption and shifting power dynamics.
Well, they actually offer some concrete advice.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Some of it might seem a little dated, given that the book was written back in 1997.
Right before the internet really took off.
Exactly. But the underlying principles are still relevant.
Okay, so what do they suggest?
One of the key things they emphasize is diversifying your assets and income streams.
Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Exactly. Especially if that basket is tied to a single nation state or a traditional 9-to-5 job.
So have a backup plan.
More than a backup plan. Think multiple streams of income, multiple ways to generate wealth.
Okay, so what kinds of things are we talking about?
Well, it could be freelancing, investing in different asset classes, even learning how to code or create content online.
So it's about being adaptable and resilient in the face of change.
Yeah, not relying on one employer or one country to provide for you.
Makes sense.
And they also really stress the importance of becoming a lifelong learner.
Okay, so never stop learning.
Exactly. Be curious. Experiment. Don't be afraid to step outside your comfort zone.
The world is changing faster than ever before.
Right. So the ability to learn and adapt is crucial.
I think that's good advice, no matter what the future holds.
I agree.
Now, they also talk a lot about the importance of community, which I found a bit surprising given their whole emphasis on individual sovereignty.
Yeah, it might seem counterintuitive at first.
Right, because we've been talking about, individuals having more power and autonomy, but they're not saying to just go it alone.
Exactly. They actually see community as essential in this new world.
So how do they reconcile those two ideas?
Well, they predict that the information age will give rise to new forms of community that transcend geographical boundaries.
Okay, so instead of being limited by where you live.
Right. You can connect with people all over the world based on shared interests and values.
So even as the power of nation states declines, we'll still have these strong networks of support.
That's the idea.
I like that.
And they encourage readers to actively seek out those communities, both online and offline.
So build relationships, collaborate, create a support system.
Exactly. Because you're going to need it to navigate the challenges and opportunities of this new world.
It's like they're saying, don't withdraw from society and become a lone wolf.
Right. It's more about choosing your own path and finding your tribe.
Finding your tribe. I like that.
And finally, they also emphasize the importance of becoming an active participant in shaping this future.
So not just sitting back and letting things happen.
Exactly. Engage in critical thinking,
Yeah.
questions, assumptions. Don't be afraid to challenge the status quo.
Think for yourself.
Yes, explore different perspectives and form your own conclusions.
And remember, it's not a solo mission.
Right. Connect with others, share your ideas, and work together to create a future that aligns with your values and vision.
Well, I have to say, I'm walking away from this deep dive with a lot to think about.
You too.
It's a future full of potential, but also a lot of uncertainty.
Definitely. And that's the beauty of it. We get to shape it.
We get to shape it. That's a great way to put it. So as we wrap up this exploration of the sovereign individual, I want to leave our listeners with this final thought. What resonates most with you?
Yeah, what questions does this raise for your future?
We encourage you to keep exploring these ideas, engage in thoughtful discussions, and most importantly, take action to shape the world you want to see.
Because remember, the future is not something that happens to us. It's something we create.
That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us, and keep exploring.